This thing is kind of like taking a bunch of paper clips and like sticking a marshmallow on it and then putting it on your head.
You got to get pinned up like Miss Me.
That's right.
Yeah, you see that?
Do you have any extras?
Yeah, nice.
Do you really want to go through it?
I think that's dangerous. Do you, lots of anti-algorithm talk.
Yeah.
Fuck algorithm.
I actually wanted to talk first about the, you got a beer? Oh, you got a, okay,
Yeah,
nice.
this is not my first run.
Okay. So I'm curious, actually, Miss Me, you brought up this concept of balance that I thought was really interesting, this idea of like, you know, you were caught in this place when you were working in an ad agency. You were caught in this place of like having to find and manicure this balance, compartmentalize activism is the way I kind of understood it. And then you talked about like, you know, your soul breathing, and I wondered if like, can our souls breathe in this like regular context of like having a job and like, you know, finding our truth and that kind of thing? Is that possible, or
Look,
are we
I'm
kidding
not
ourselves?
going to tell people what to do. Everybody's different. I know how I had to deal with myself, and that's what I had to do. I know a lot of people, especially in our generation, we have this we're striving for meaning that a lot of other generation didn't necessarily feel like they had to. And I think that's something that's really important to a lot of us and is the source of a lot of searching, soul searching, finding yourself, finding what you want to do, people call it making yourself happy. I have a personal problem with this whole happiness thing, but that's a whole other discussion.
We'll get into that.
Okay. But that's me. I had to find this balance, and it didn't work. But I can't tell people what to do. That is the last thing I want to do.
So Jennifer, in what you just said, you talked about, you know, in this professional context, it's essentially like, you know, a list of things that we can actually think about and consider, expanding our circles and stuff like that. Is that a way for us to actually realistically find this balance? Is it possible?
Balance between good and evil?
Well, balance between like our, you know, the things that we're uncomfortable with, you know, like being able to, you know, have a job in this regular context, find ourselves in this kind of like quote unquote corporate world, and also being able to express ourselves and like be honest about things.
Oh, I think the struggle it can manifest in all different kinds of ways. For some people, that balance that they're looking for is between work and life. Other people, when you talk about work-life balance, that means everyone's mad at them. You know, like, so, I mean, I don't really think I have like a good answer to the question other than it really is different for everybody. Some people find a lot of meaning in design, and they channel their entire identity in it. And that's when it gets really personal. Like, that's when people get really defensive, when you start criticizing what they've made because it's them instead of their work. So now I'm getting down another like dark hole, but it's another talk, I guess. But
well, Justin, is it the same for you? Like, you're in the media. Is it easier in the media to find that balance, to be able to kind of like express both sides of that, or are the constraints the same?
Well, yeah. I mean, balance in media is hard. I mean, you know, in media, the balance, or in journalism, the balance is, you know, work and work. I mean, you know, work bleeds into every aspect of your personal life. It's hard not to, but you know, we're all kind of weird, obsessive Type A personalities that are obsessive and neurotic, so it kind of fits within our own neuroses. But I think overall, like, you know, there's something you have to sacrifice as being a media, being a journalist, which is sometimes your ability to go do things and advocate for things and you know, get involved in things. And I don't mind it. You know, I know other journalists have a harder time with this. You know, I got a call this weekend to go to the you know, the Women's March, and I kind of said no. You know, I don't go to protests unless I'm covering it. I don't go to demonstrations. I don't sign petitions. I get so bad that I don't clap at most things. Like, if
right
here is fine, so I clap for both of you. Don't worry, but. But, you know, a normal thing, if someone's talking, I sit in the back and I kind of stand stoically. I've gotten really good at it, to the point where people stare at me and I look like a weirdo, like I'm like an undercover cop or something. But
is that difficult? Like, in other words, like,
I feel maybe the thing is everybody should find a way to balance with. Everybody has their own balance to deal with, and the beauty in our society today is that you can kind of create your own solutions. I'm still doing that crazy shit I'm doing. It's been 5 years, and I'm still alive. I'm still not dying from hunger, and I still have a roof. So I figured it out, and that was a weird shit to figure out. So, I mean, I think if I can figure it out, a lot of people can figure it out, and especially in the creative industry, we can really figure it out, and you can just create a new solution for you to balance certain things that maybe bother you, and maybe the thing is maybe not to mute it. Don't mute it, because that will mess you up at some point. Just listen to it and try to incorporate it in whatever you can do. Either change what you're doing or find solutions integrated to what you're doing.
So that kind of brings me back to some of the stuff that you talked about, Jennifer. And like the sense I get is like, okay, first of all, realize we're being delusional in sometimes thinking about how the impact of design and the impact that like as designers we can have. But then I think about things like, like designers have, there are a lot of think pieces now, right? Like, like people writing about the impact of design, like now's the time, like, put your voice out there, design for good, empathy, all the stuff that you said, like, are we kidding ourselves totally, or is there room for movement or that design can inspire? Or is it total bullshit?
Hashtag not all design.
Right.
I mean...
Okay, yeah. Forget it, we're kidding ourselves.
I mean, you gotta be really, really self-aware when you start talking about how you're going to instill empathy in people. I mean, like there's certain assumptions that you have to make. Like, is empathy really what people need? Doesn't empathy make people sad? Like, maybe what you need is compassion, which actually makes you feel good and helpful. Like, and I hear all these words being thrown around, and I think people are doing it because of it comes down to money, right? I mean, that's why Zuckerberg wants to create empathy. That's why he wants you to share everything. That's why he shares very personal things, because you can't just share happy things on Facebook, because then you won't share, then you won't be on Facebook too much. So now he starts to share sad things. And
well, he's running, right? He's running in the next election, I think. That's like consensus.
He didn't have any updates about the Women's March, nor did Sheryl Sandberg. Lean in.
Well said. So maybe that comes back to how and what to do. You gave us some stuff there. I kind of felt like, Miss Me, you said, I will not use it as an excuse. This idea of having no access to traditional media, right? Like I can't buy a billboard. You said I'm going to go out and kind of like make my own. Yeah. So I'm getting roped into a little bit the point that you brought up, Jennifer, of like, yeah, I agree with you, not with your tactics, but I'm kind of curious, like, is using the word that you used, is vandalism, is like this kind of like counterculture subversive measure, is that the only way to kind of make a point?
I don't think so at all. I think people should vote. Actually, I think it's a danger to just do all these alternate things and then not vote. I mean, our society works in a certain way, and especially as women, that was not given to us. We had to fight for it. Our mothers, grandmothers fought for it. I think it is very important to vote. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think everything has a certain impact, and I mean, everybody has different talents. I'm not a writer. I'm not all those things. I'm not an organizer, but I paint with my guts, and I do things that make me. It's also a pretty selfish thing I do as well. I'm not doing it for everybody else. At first, I am doing it for myself. I'm not even gonna lie. This is something that was for me to heal, for my surroundings to feel that it made more sense. Like the story of the little boy from Hegel that throws the rock in the water. It's a philosophical story about how it's important to have you do stuff sometimes just to prove yourself you exist by having an impact around you. And that is also what I do. I'm not gonna pretend I'm like this great person. I'm not. But I'm going to try to use everything I have to go where I think is good and proper, just because that also makes me feel that I'm doing something good in my life, and that's what matters to me. Money doesn't matter to me. A lot of those things don't matter to me, but that matters to me. So I'll do that.
Justin, what do you say to people who might not have the access that people with an audience have?
Well, I mean, I think, like a really crowded football game, it's one thing to have 100 people on the pitch all playing whatever sport analogy I'm making.
Let's go. We're getting there.
You also need someone on the sidelines doing commentary. I mean, you need someone watching from home. You need somebody, listening on the radio. And I think that's kind of what we do. I mean, our sacrifice is, we're not going to kind of get as involved in politics. We're not going to go to the demonstrations. We're not going to, get into a lot of, we're not going to put our feet in the game, but we are going to sit on the side and kind of either break it down, make it intelligible for people at home. We're going to, hopefully provide access to relevant critical information to folks who wouldn't normally have that access or have that way of getting it. And we're going to try to distribute it as thoughtfully as possible with as little filter or propaganda or, I suppose, spin as possible. Do we always do that? No. Do we even frequently do that? No. But I mean, we're going to do this. I think a lot of us are pushing to do that as often as humanly possible, so that the end result is a system of democracy or government or public discourse or civilization, where we're not totally fucking it up as much as we possibly could be.
Nice, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on, given politics seems to be obviously a very clear undercurrent here, how, and again, I get roped into like this idea of privilege and that kind of thing as well. But like, how should designers be, stating their putting their stake in the ground on the political spectrum? Should we be very clear about our politics?
I mean, in many ways, it's easy for me to be anti-Trump,
right?
It'd be imagine if I come up in there, I was like, woohoo! It would be really hard. A lot of people are saying that Trump has given people permission to like finally be their true racist self.
Right.
Whatever. Everyone was already racist. What was the question? It was about like should we always?
Well, like how overt should we be about our politics? I feel like there's this concept of like artists. There's they are political animals in some ways. Like, can we?
See, that's not true.
Okay, chime in on that.
Especially here in Montreal, and I'm not saying that as a criticism at all. But there's very few of us in the streets that are actually stating opinions or are being political. A lot of people that I know, fellow artists that I love and respect, don't go there. They don't feel the need. I think it's probably from a place of a certain type of privilege, but it's also just they don't necessarily care. Montreal is very much of a bubble as well. And it doesn't come with it. It's not a necessary thing. Because as soon as you start being that public about any opinion, backlash comes.
So I figured artists were more free of that, but no, you're saying like the context
first of all,
is the same.
we're like not free. We're so messed up inside. We're trying, but it's a whole mess. But no, because as soon as you get political, whether you're an artist or not, it's the same. People are gonna still like criticize you, and you as soon as you state something, someone's gonna disagree or have some kind of opinion, always. And I'm very public about my opinion, so for sure I'm going to get all the backlash very publicly as well. And it's not easier.
Okay.
But it just goes with it.
And there's a thing in journalism, and it goes back to your idea of empathy and sympathy. There's a lot of journalists, writers, editors, so on, who have this impulse to do really human interest stories. And this goes back to the dawn of journalism, and this makes a lot of sense. And especially if you're profiling the plight of a Syrian refugee family, this makes a whole lot of sense. You want to much like art does in a lot of ways. Take a story, take human experience, and broadcast it to the masses. And in the journalism world, with the hope of conveying a particular message, striking home a particular policy, or underscoring a current problem, journalism sometimes uses that for the exact wrong reasons. And I'm seeing a bit of it now, and there's a bit of this trend to say, who are these Trump voters? Who are these alt-right people we hear about? Are they just like us? And there's a real worry I have now that sometimes art used in the wrong way can be just as bad as journalism used in the wrong way. And I think sometimes there's a lot of overlap that go between the two, and sometimes they can be used to kind of normalize or rationalize or in some cases trivialize things that should be taken very seriously and shouldn't be sort of kind of, you shouldn't put the Snapchat filter over.
But how much of this, I think you might have mentioned in your talk, but like how much of this is the audience, I feel like the news media very often uses the audience for justification here, right? Like, well, this is what they want, so this is what we give them. What role, especially now with the normalizing that you've all brought up in different ways, what role does the media play there? And you mentioned antithesis of the government. Is that now the rule kind of thing?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of media outlets who will not be, who are going to try to bring, the yardstick a little closer to the Trump administration in hopes of either rationalizing it for the public, gaining better access in hopes of doing more critical coverage later on, or just because they feel like it is their moral duty as journalists to come closer to the center. I think I have access to our analytics. I know what stories get read. I know how many stories get read. I know how long people read a story. And there's a huge impulse to say that's what does well. That's what we're going to do. Luckily, there's a couple trends that are happening on my news website, which is that people like longer, smarter, investigative, hard-hitting stories. They're not just going for the easy clickbait stories. And that's one of these great myths of the current media market, is that people will tell you that the easy 200-word story that is stupid, is about cats or Hillary Clinton's emails or whatever. Those are the stories that do best. But a lot of the data we're seeing, and I know I've had this confirmed with other websites, is actually that people like the serious, difficult 2,000, 3,000 word story that is investigative, that tears apart an issue, that gets really deep in the weeds, that really holds politicians to account. Those stories do better. So
that's reassuring.
It is reassuring, but part of the problem is that that's not where a lot of the news media is going. So I think
because it's harder. I mean, it's hard.
It's harder.
It's
It's
spend
expensive.
money. So Jennifer,
I actually wonder if people wake up in the morning and say, I want to read an article.
No,
I think people wake up in the morning and they're like, I want to be informed, I want to be entertained, I want to know what the weather is, and they don't really care if that is an article or if it's 6,000 words or if it's 6 words. And I think that is another problem with media, actually, is how they're conveying the information, not just the content of it.
Okay, what do you mean by that? How they're conveying information?
Like the Times has been publishing articles since 1851.
Okay.
And they're still doing that.
Okay, right. Like they haven't understood how people now consume.
They're not thinking about like what the needs of the people are and how they've changed since my great-great-grandmother.
Right.
It's different now, and it's hard when it's backed by advertisements, which are failing support for money. And we could talk about this all. What's wrong with media, just like in its core, of trying to make money. Like when I worked in a newsroom, we never talked about what was going to make money.
Right.
That was actually kind of sacrilege. Like, no, that's for the business marketing side.
Yeah, right.
And I felt that was actually irresponsible. Like, if news is important to a democracy, then you have to care about how it makes money. And you have to take risks with that, and you have to experiment. And at a place like the Times, you couldn't. It was very hard to take risks because of the reputation that the Times has, that it's reputable.
Yeah, right.
And so the minute you make a tiny mistake, people then are like, Times is failing.
Yeah.
And you're just like, you know what? We just did an article about puppy dogs. They were cute. Give us a break. Or they do something that is, was fine, whatever. But it's really hard when your newsroom is strapped for cash, and it's so important for democracy. And forget about what the people want to read. It's also like what is going to make us money.
So is that a message to the audience?
So wait, you're saying that it should be valued through if it makes money or not?
No,
she's saying we should acknowledge it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's sort of acknowledging it and not responding to it.
Both a bit, because I think that's a huge danger, right? Obviously.
Well, you don't do the story that you think. It's different if it's ad-sponsored content. Is very different, right? So you could do.
No, but still, if people actually don't care about women's rights and they're really into Kim Kardashian, are you really just going to talk about her? I think there's also responsibility.
No. You don't just follow what people want to read. Otherwise, I would read that Kim Kardashian thing. But regardless, you don't.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, you would too, right? So
I would not.
You wouldn't really.
I don't. I actually never mentioned them. That is a very rare thing. I keep all those people that I don't think should be acknowledged even out of my mouth. I don't talk about it.
Okay, we'll pretend that you didn't mention. We'll talk about someone else then.
No, but I'm just saying this is a very easy point to make. That's why I'm saying
I just think it's for example, the graph that we saw earlier. I don't know if it showed the Times ran in proportional amount of stories about email servers, Hillary Clinton's email servers, and that's not what people want to read about. It's not what is actually interesting. That's not what's moving votes in an election.
It was always everywhere. So it was not. It was really the media's choice, or was it because people somehow cared about that bullshit?
Fair and balanced.
Or that stuff?
Yeah, I have to say, unlike your experience in the newsroom, reporters did not write stories based on what people wanted to read, period. Like I said, like they thought that was marketing and business to deal with. They just wrote about stories that they were passionate about and that they thought were important and interesting.
Well, I think there's a couple things happening. I think one thing has to be, and I think the one upside of kind of integrating newsrooms a little bit closer into not necessarily the business and marketing side, but the social media side and kind of like the forward-facing audience side of things, is that journalists are now accountable for making people read their frigging stories. You can no longer take as gospel that the New York Times is going to land on your front stoop and people are going to devour the thing, every word and line. So journalists now have to go and say, well, shit, like I'm doing all this important work. How do I get people to read it?
They need to please people. They need to please people in a way.
Yes and no. I mean, then the question becomes, do you do the story that is being quoted a lot by, Republican strategists and winding up in the debate, like Hillary Clinton's emails, that you think is important because you're getting a lot of spin on it, there's a lot of shares on it? Or do you say to yourself, okay, I have this important story that, in and of itself might not do great on social media, might not get read all that many times. Do I just not do it? Do I give up on it? Do I just drop it and move back on to Hillary Clinton's emails? Or do I think to myself, how do I get people to read this? And that's where design comes in. That's I think art comes in later on when kind of in measuring the influence of the story and all of this. But is it about making videos for the story that are more easily digestible in your Facebook timeline? Is it about creating nice graphics for the story that help engage and attract the reader? And these are all things we're experimenting with right now. Luckily, the New York Times is obsessing with this right now, as are we. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think it's a nice confluence of art and design and journalism to try to get people to kind of come in and deal with these things. Honestly, it's unpleasant to sit in front of a computer screen and read 5,000 words of heavy text. But at the end of the day, this is still kind of a superficial thing. We also need to have a big, deep conversation about what we're writing, how we're writing it, and so on. But this is a good first step.
I want to move on to something before I do. Is there any questions from the audience people have? No, cool.
Wait, no, there's one right there.
Oh, sorry,
I see
was
one.
there? So dark. Go ahead, I'll repeat it. Oh, you got a mic, perfect.
Yeah, for Justin, I'm asking you why even the modern media as Vice continue to feed the public with facts instead asking fundamental questions, and plus media keep telling us how and what to think about those facts, instead open discussions like artists like Miss Me. So I feel a lot that media take us as some easy to manipulate people as politicians.
Ooh.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I'm a journalist, so fundamentally I'm going to tell you that the facts are our business. We trade and sell facts, and we can't get away from that. I think when you get away from a fact-based media, the fundamental ideas of the responsible press that go back, hundreds of years, when you get away from that, that gets into really worrying territory. It gets into a spot where debates and conversations and political philosophies come detached from reality, and then you get into we're trying to get as close as we can, and this is it. And then if we start asking questions like what is reality, then we start getting to a very terrifying place. So fundamentally, I am in the business of trying to ascertain the best facts available to me and putting them out there. That being said, do we have to do a better job of situating what those facts mean, pulling out the salient facts, making facts relevant to people, picking the facts that are relevant to people? Yes, because media has had a really, really bad habit of just reporting things that they find interesting that are not relevant or legible in some cases to the average person, to the mass public. And it created sort of a gilded class of newspapers and media that is just did not become relevant to the public or pertinent to the public. And I think that's a really worrying thing that we have to come back to. But I think there's a whole bunch of space to do, I think, what you're talking about, but it's not necessarily my job. But it's complementary.
Back there, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
A lot of the discussion today was about how the media can improve its performance and how they can, bullshit. And the media is always portrayed to hold, like, politicians or, the higher up people accountable. But how can the public hold the media accountable?
Oh, you don't have
30
to.
seconds or less.
No, I mean, it's funny. I think the media hasn't figured that out yet, and maybe we need to do that. I mean, we've recently, a lot of news outlets have abolished comment sections, which is probably for the best. But there is definitely a growing divide, and the distrust from the public to the press is partly due to that growing divide. Honestly, there's something to be said for the fact that reaching out to journalists via Twitter, Facebook, or email, or calling them, please don't call us, but if you must, calling us, can help both journalists kind of respond to the public and deal with public criticism, but also give the public a level of trust that there is a person behind that news story.
Is there some aspect of curation here, like this idea of like knowing, trusting, certain sources over other, certain people over other? Like, how does that come into it? Like we need to be. You talked about echo chamber a lot, and I feel like that's what a lot of this is, right? If I always follow the same sources, like where does trust come into play, or how do I know who to trust? That's why I kind of like the idea of looking outside media to some extent, and people who are not beholden to some of these, to making money essentially in this way. How do we know who to trust? How do you guys decide who to trust?
I read every morning 3 different sources minimum of news.
Who, for example?
BBC, Reuters, and New York Times usually.
Okay.
And then I trust myself to make my own opinion that I know will not be perfect and based on something not perfect, but at least I have different angles. And sometimes if it's stuff that happens in Europe, I'll read some other European. I try, understanding that there's only so much I can do. But I mean, I think media today are like brands, and they have to always prove to you that they're worthy. And it's silly, but it's true. And like some brands change, like CNN changed like a couple of years ago, and that was weird. And then people stopped watching them or started watching them. I don't know. I think we're all accountable for everybody, and I think we should all trust each other and stay educated and always, as we said, challenge ourselves as well as others. And I think it's hard to know. Honestly.
Jennifer, you talked about expanding our circles. Does that apply to news where we get our info as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I blame Google.
Nice, thank you.
Boss is not watching. I think in the past you could pick up a newspaper, pick up a magazine, but now you can just Google it. And at the top of the feed, if you look up Hillary Clinton illness, is some, InfoWars bullshit at the top. And it's because the algorithm is neutral. And I'm like, your algorithm is not fucking neutral. There's a person that made that algorithm, and not that person is specifically targeting that. But anyways, like the point is that that is not neutral.
So how do you cut through that?
Well, that's the thing is I feel like everyone now feels empowered to check, right? They're like, I'm going to fact check that, and they Google it, and they like don't look at the URL. They don't think to even news articles are designed in a way that is for print, right? The first line in a New York Times article tells you where they're reporting from, right? But everyone thinks the New York Times is just in New York because it says the New York Times at the top. And they're not, it's just designed in a way that has inherited other principles that don't apply to now. And that goes across everything. So I do think that it comes down to like people feeling like they need to do the checking for whatever reason. They want to find out another resource or a different byline. But I don't really see that going away. I think people, it's interesting to me that people are taking it upon themselves to like figure if it's true or not. I mean, we were just talking earlier about this video that we both saw online that was really striking. And everyone's like, prove to me that it's not backwards. You're like, prove to me that it's not backwards. And then you go back and forth. And like there's this immediate assumption that it's not true until you prove it. And
well, that's usually depending if it fits what you think, right? Usually. I'm guilty of that too, right? Something that really is against something that I believe, and I'm like, oh no, that can't be, right? Just like, you're the day you discover your parents aren't perfect, you're like, oh no, no.
But that's what's interesting is that they're making you question something that you thought was true.
Yeah, but so I think it's upon us to have the humility to. And it's like a balance of trusting yourself and your intelligence enough, yet be humble enough to understand that maybe you're wrong. And
Ooh, nice.
I think it's important when you have discussions, and it's important when you like, even everything I do and all my opinions. Also, one of the things that makes me more comfortable with everything I do is I understand that I can change my mind. And I think it's important that we understand we can, and we're allowed to, and others are allowed to. Otherwise, what's the point of even talking to people you don't agree with if it's not to maybe at some point they change your mind, you change your mind, you evolve your opinion together? It's important to have this kindness towards ourselves and others, that it's okay to have an opinion because you can change your mind. And a lot of us now, the echo chambers, all that stuff, it's like you don't agree. Not only we can't talk to you, but you're like, you're a racist or you're a misogynist. And maybe the person didn't come from that place and doesn't understand that that will sound that way. And it is that way unless you talk to them. But if you label them a certain thing, it's so aggressive and it's so hurtful, people won't want to change or evolve. And I think it's important not to attack because, people can change their minds.
And we talk a bunch about radicalization online, and it's always under the guise of Islamic terrorism. But there's all sorts of radicalization online that is just crazy white people in their basements, and that's where InfoWars came from. Just crazy people reading conspiracy blogs and then just bouncing them off each other. And Reddit and 4chan have expounded this. The point the other day, a lot of these people existed before, but they existed in isolation or on Usenet groups or meeting up in public parks to discuss how the government is poisoning your tap water. Now they can do it so easily online. The other day, I was writing a story about how the second in command of the Canadian military got relieved of duty and under quiet circumstances. They didn't explain why. One of the first theories from one of our readers was something along the lines of it was an attempt by the defense minister to overthrow the prime minister in a coup d'état that was because of his support for gay rights. And I'm just reading this, being like, how did you get there?
Right.
How did you get to that conclusion?
Right.
But these people now have a community online where they can just, feed into each other and prove each other right, and they build a fortress around themselves where just real news media can't penetrate. And this is why facts still matter.
Right. Be humble enough to know when you're wrong. I like that.
To accept that you can be wrong, right?
Yeah. It's a good
The
reminder, though,
possibility.
that we forget that, right? Cool. Thank you very much. I'll say thanks one more time, and we're going to stick around for a drink and chat over here, so I would encourage you to do the same. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Miss Me, Justin Ling, Jennifer Daniel, and thanks for coming.